She didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't even flinch when Camilla gripped her arm, hard enough to leave a mark. But 2 fingers tapped against her skirt, just once, and the royal guard saw it. A signal, trained, deliberate, and the moment Charlotte was safely behind the Princess of Wales, he turned to Camilla and gave an order no one in the palace had ever heard before. You will salute the heir you just laid hands on. Not a request, not a formality, an order, issued by a Coldstream guard, enforced by silence, backed by royal law. Now, before we show you the exact moment, Camilla lowered her head and the secret chain reaction it triggered across the entire palace. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell icon, because this wasn't just protocol being broken. It was power, reversed, by the last person she thought she'd ever answer to. The late afternoon light poured through the stained glass windows of Windsor Castle's long library, casting jewel-toned patterns across the polished parquet floor. Sunlight hit the spines of century-old volumes stacked in rosewood shelves that ran from floor to vaulted ceiling. A single ceremonial case stood in the centre of the room, velvet-lined and glass-sealed, containing a crimson and gold sash worn by Queen Victoria during the first Commonwealth Charter signing. Today it served as the centrepiece of a quiet, invitation-only heritage session, meant to familiarise the younger royals with their family's ceremonial lineage. No cameras, no press, just 3 aides, a heritage archivist, and 1 royal guard posted near the inner arch. Sergeant Holden Merrick stood motionless, tall, clean-shaven, and carved from the discipline of his former tours in Helmand and Kandahar. Holden wore the full scarlet tunic and bearskin hat of the Coldstream Guards. His gloves were fitted, his boots polished to an unbroken shine, but it was his stillness, the kind forged in battlefield silence, not parade drills, that commanded the room more than any uniform. At precisely 3:04 p.m., the door opened with a soft creak, and Princess Charlotte entered. She wore a tailored navy cardigan and a pale blouse tucked neatly into her skirt. Her shoes tapped lightly on the floor as she walked, flanked by a senior governess and an equerry in training who carried a clipboard and water bottle. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid. Despite her age, her demeanour already carried the posture of someone aware she was being watched, not by strangers, but by history. She greeted the archivist with a smile and turned her attention to the sash in the display case. "Was this really hers?" she asked, eyes wide. The archivist smiled. "Indeed, ma'am. Worn at the 1867 Charter." Charlotte stepped closer. "It's heavier than I thought it would be." Holden, from his post, noted the question. Simple, curious, no nerves. Then the air shifted. The doors opened again. Too early. They weren't due to open for another 10 minutes. Queen Camilla entered, not flanked by staff, but striding alone. She wore a tailored cream coat and a polished brooch in the shape of a thistle. Her smile was practiced, her pace brisk, and the effect immediate. Every aide stiffened. Holden's eyes tracked her. So did Charlotte's. "Darling," Camilla cooed, brushing past the others and straightening Charlotte's braid. "Let's work on that diction before anyone else embarrasses us, shall we?" It was said lightly, almost sweetly, but Holden caught the flicker in Charlotte's expression, the slight lean backward, the clenching of her fingers. He clocked it. Camilla's tone sharpened by degrees. She interrupted the archivist repeatedly, correcting him mid-sentence. When Charlotte stumbled over the Latin motto on the sash's plaque, Camilla sighed, loud enough for the staff to hear, and muttered, "Honestly, is no one teaching proper pronunciation anymore?" Charlotte's voice lowered. She stepped closer to her governess. No one else said a word, but Holden's jaw tensed ever so slightly. He hadn't moved. He didn't speak, but he was watching now. Not the sash, not the artifact, but the gap closing between a girl's shrinking shoulders, and the woman who'd just decided she wasn't speaking well enough. The room fell into polite stillness, but beneath it, something had shifted. The archivist cleared his throat and tried to guide the moment back toward the ceremonial display. "If we follow the timeline, Your Royal Highness," he said gently, addressing Charlotte, "the sash was last worn formally during the 1953, but Charlotte wasn't looking at him anymore. She was holding the placard with both hands, her eyes scanning the Latin inscription once more, lips moving silently. Camilla stepped closer. "Try again," she said, voice low but firm. "The motto, from the beginning." Charlotte hesitated. She looked up at the older woman, then back at the placard. "Semper, vigilans, in..." "Stop." Camilla's correction was instant. "Not vigilance, vigilance. You're dropping the second syllable. It sounds like you're guessing." "I'm trying," Charlotte said softly. Camilla's eyes narrowed. "Well, try harder." And then, without raising her voice, without warning, she reached out and grabbed Charlotte's upper arm, not with violence, but with speed. Her gloved fingers wrapped just above the elbow and squeezed, briefly but unmistakably, guiding, no, forcing, the girl to stand straighter. It wasn't a strike. It wasn't even long enough to leave bruises. But it was unmistakably corrective, a grip of impatience. The kind of hold adults use when words stop working. Charlotte inhaled sharply. Not loud, just enough to draw a tiny breath through her teeth. Everyone in the room heard it. Everyone saw the contact, and no one said a word. The governess froze. The archivist looked down. Even the young equerry, clipboard still in hand, pretended to adjust his watch. Camilla's smile returned like a switch had been flipped. "That's better," she said, releasing Charlotte's arm and stepping back half a pace. "Posture is power. You'll learn that eventually." But Charlotte had already taken a half step backward. Her eyes didn't rise. Her hands trembled at her sides. Holden Merrick saw it all. From his position by the door, he had full visual on the entire room. His ceremonial stillness hadn't broken. But beneath the scarlet tunic, his heart rate had begun to rise. He hadn't seen violence, but he'd seen enough. The angle of Charlotte's shoulder as she stepped back, the way her hand found the hem of her skirt and clutched it tighter. It wasn't fear in the way children flinch from shadows. It was something else, something more practiced, more contained. She didn't cry, she didn't protest. She just fell silent. And for Sergeant Holden Merrick, trained to spot danger not in explosions but in invisible shifts, that silence hit harder than any shout ever could. Camilla turned toward the sash again, speaking lightly, but Holden didn't hear her voice anymore. He was watching Charlotte now, because something small had just cracked, and cracks deepen quickly under pressure. Charlotte stood completely still. Camilla had already moved on, directing the archivist to pull out a second exhibit card from the side table, pretending nothing had happened. Her voice floated through the high-ceilinged chamber with an artificial sweetness. But Charlotte didn't turn toward her, didn't respond. Instead, she looked down. Her right hand slowly loosened from the skirt's hem, and two fingers tapped softly against the fabric. Twice, then again. A rhythm. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Sergeant Holden Merrick saw it. So did no one else. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. A child fidgeting, a bit of nervous restlessness. But Holden had been present 3 months ago during a private security seminar held in the royal apartments, a session Catherine herself had commissioned. It focused on non-verbal safeguarding protocols for royal children, specific gestures they could use in moments when speech might not be safe or permitted. The signal Charlotte used now had a designated meaning. I am not comfortable. I need to be moved. It was not to be used in jest, not in confusion, only with certainty, and Holden knew, without a sliver of doubt, that she meant it. His posture shifted, not by much, less than an inch. A subtle readjustment of weight onto the balls of his feet. A recalibration of position so he could now see Charlotte fully, while placing himself precisely between her and Camilla, without drawing attention. The archivist was still speaking. Camilla was flipping a velvet page on a display binder. The aides stood like ghosts. but Holden's right hand dipped behind his back to the small black clasp on his belt, a discreet security toggle wired to the internal palace comms loop. He pressed a coded pattern, not a panic signal, not an alarm, a Tier 2 safeguarding flag, low volume, non-disruptive, routed straight to the personal devices of 3 people only. Captain Wynne, the royal family's safeguarding liaison, and Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales. The signal was anonymous. No context was sent. But its location and urgency level were locked. Holden's shoulders squared half a degree more. Charlotte had signalled. He had answered. Now it was time for the palace to respond. He glanced at her, just for a breath. Her eyes met his for half a second. She didn't nod. She didn't blink, but she stopped tapping. That was enough. Whatever happened next, he would be standing between her and it. She didn't hurry, didn't call attention, didn't even let the sound of her heels echo too loudly. Catherine, Princess of Wales, entered the long library with the precision of someone who knew the architecture better than any floor plan. Her navy blue coat dress moved in clean, elegant lines as she stepped through the side threshold near the fireplace alcove, not the main ceremonial entrance. A clipboard in one hand, nothing else. Sergeant Holden Merrick registered her arrival without turning his head, but his body shifted, just enough to signal recognition. The coded response had been received. Catherine paused only briefly as she took in the room. Camilla stood near the sash display, mid-sentence about the stitching patterns on imperial artifacts. Her voice was light, too light. Behind her, the archivist nodded politely, unaware of the new presence. Aides remained still, unsure whether to bow or continue pretending nothing was wrong. Charlotte stood 6 feet away. Her arms were by her sides, her shoulders pulled tight, and her eyes, usually bright and questioning, were lowered, rimmed with the dull glassiness of someone holding their breath without realizing. Catherine saw everything. She didn't react visibly. She simply walked in as if her presence were pre-scheduled. "Afternoon," she said gently, to no one in particular. Camilla looked up. "Darling, you're early." "I was nearby." Catherine's tone was pleasant, measured. She smiled softly at the archivist. "Apologies for intruding. I just wanted to check in." Her eyes drifted naturally, deliberately, toward Charlotte. "Sweetheart, would you come with me for a moment? Just a quick question about your lines." Charlotte blinked, then nodded. She took one step forward. And that was all it took for Camilla to interject. "She's fine," Camilla said too quickly. "We're making good progress here." Catherine didn't flinch. Neither did Charlotte. But Holden moved. Just one step. A precise shift of weight, placing his body directly between Camilla and Charlotte's path. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't aggressive, but it was impossible to ignore. Camilla's expression hardened. "There's no need to interfere." Catherine's voice didn't rise, it lowered. Charlotte gave a signal. That silenced the entire room. Camilla's mouth opened. "She's being dramatic." Catherine stepped closer, now standing beside Holden. Her eyes never left Charlotte. She reached a hand out gently. "Come with me, darling." Charlotte moved, and as she passed behind Holden's now wall-like frame, the guard subtly adjusted again, sealing the invisible corridor between Camilla and the girl. Catherine didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Holden had understood. He didn't need a royal title to act on duty, just a signal, and a child in need of distance. The door had barely closed behind Catherine and Charlotte before the air in the long library shifted again. But this time it was sharper, less controlled. Camilla turned on her heel, her face tight with suppressed fury, and faced the man still blocking the center of the room. "Sergeant!" she snapped, her voice bouncing off the panelled walls. "You will stand down immediately. That child is not under threat." Holden Merrick didn't blink. He remained precisely where he was, gloved hands folded behind his back, bearskin hat casting a faint shadow across his brow. But the set of his jaw had changed, firmer, squared. You answer to the crown, Camilla continued, stepping forward. Not to whim, not to emotion, and certainly not to maternal overreach. Holden spoke calmly, his voice a level baritone that cut through the silence. My duty is to the safety of the minor heirs, ma'am. Camilla froze. The room did too. Holden continued, eyes fixed forward. Princess Charlotte issued a coded distress signal. I observed marks on her arm. I placed myself between the source of that distress and the heir. The archivist shifted uncomfortably. The equerry looked down. No one moved. You are accusing me of harming a child? Camilla asked coldly, taking another step forward. I am enforcing separation per internal safeguarding procedures, Holden replied. You are to remain where you are. Her expression cracked. Camilla's voice sharpened. You are out of line. And then, suddenly, she stepped forward again, her heel clipping hard against the parquet floor as she raised a hand, not to strike, but to reach, as if to brush past Holden's frame and reclaim proximity to the hallway. That's when he moved. One gloved hand lifted, palm out, just enough to signal halt. Not a shove, not a barrier, but unmistakable. It stopped her cold. The movement, subtle, professional, exact, carried the full weight of royal protective training. It wasn't physical aggression, it was authority. Camilla stared at the hand, then at him. You are a ceremonial guard, she hissed. You don't get to decide anything. Holden's voice dropped a fraction. With respect, ma'am, I carry out orders from the proper chain of command. You are not currently within it. The silence returned. This time it hummed. From the hallway beyond, the soft sounds of Catherine and Charlotte's steps faded into distance. Back inside, Holden Merrick held the line. Not because he'd raised his voice, but because he hadn't. And for the first time that day, Camilla didn't know what to do. The long library had fallen into unnatural quiet. Queen Camilla stood near the velvet display case, hands stiff at her sides, her breath tight. A single ray of afternoon light caught the edge of the glass, and in its reflection she could just make out the figure standing between her and the corridor. Sergeant Holden Merrick hadn't moved. He was no longer a ceremonial ornament. He had become the wall. You may step aside now, she said again, more measured this time. The child is gone. There's no reason for this to continue. Holden's response was calm. My post is not concluded. She blinked. You're still enforcing distance. From whom? There's no one left to protect. There is still protocol, he replied. Camilla's jaw clenched. You've made your point. No, ma'am, Holden said quietly. I haven't. She turned fully now, shoulders squared, fury barely caged. What exactly are you implying? Holden's tone did not rise, but it changed, took on a clarity that cut straight through the polished silence of the room. You laid hands on a future sovereign. The words hung there. Camilla's expression flickered, a mix of offence, disbelief, and the dawning realization that this was no longer a quiet scolding behind palace doors. You will, Holden continued, acknowledge her status before you leave this room. Camilla's eyes narrowed. You want me to apologize to a child? I'm asking for a formal recognition, he said. A gesture of deference, a salute. For a moment, it seemed absurd, the idea of commanding a queen consort to salute an 8-year-old. But within the Royal Guard Code, there existed such provisions, rare, reserved, used only in cases where a subordinate violated the hierarchy of succession, particularly involving physical contact. Not a military salute, not even a bow, just a small, precise nod, performed without spectacle, to reaffirm the unbreakable chain of legacy. It hadn't been used in over a decade. Camilla scoffed, quietly stunned. You're bluffing. Holden didn't move. Ma'am, you will salute, or this becomes formal. Silence stretched. Two aides at the far end of the hall froze mid-step, watching without making eye contact. The archivist had quietly taken a step back. The equerry stood motionless, uncertain whether to breathe, and Camilla's fingers twitched at her sides. Then, With an expression carved from granite, she straightened her back, drew in a breath, and gave the barest nod imaginable. A single dip of the chin. No words. Holden saw it. He didn't thank her. He didn't nod back. He simply shifted once, stepping aside by 2 inches, not for her benefit, but because the gesture had been made, and it was now documented by him. That was all the palace would need, and more than Camilla would ever forget. Camilla didn't speak as she left the long library. She walked with tight shoulders and clenched fingers, her heels striking too sharply against the old stone floor. No one escorted her. No aide fell in beside her. The sound of her departure echoed like a dismissal. Sergeant Holden Merrick remained behind. He didn't glance after her. He only reached once more to the clasp on his belt and pressed a second sequence into the discreet com toggle, this one reserved for documentation of Level 1 symbolic rectification. A salute to a royal heir, issued by a royal superior under staff observation. The code would log the time, location, and nature of the act. It would be archived in the private ledger of the Royal Safeguarding Committee. And most importantly, it would trigger a quiet but immediate review. 15 minutes later, Security Group B began its reallocation. 2 aides were reassigned from Camilla's afternoon appointments to backup scheduling under the Office of the Princess of Wales. Another, the younger equerry from the Heritage event, was quietly called to make a verbal account of what he saw. The archivist who witnessed the arm grab was told to submit a neutral observation form. He didn't ask why. None of them received instructions. They just obeyed the shape of the palace when it began to move. Downstairs, Charlotte was taken gently by Mrs. Langford to the Royal Paediatric Wing. There, she was examined by the on-call physician, a woman who had been treating the royal children for nearly 7 years. No dramatics, just questions. Did it hurt when she squeezed? A little. Do you feel okay now? A small nod. Photographs were taken of the faint redness near her upper arm, not to punish anyone, but to preserve an accurate timestamp. They would be sealed under the internal code reserved for protective contact assessments. In the Western Corridor, Catherine gave her brief verbal statement to the safeguarding liaison. No flare. No condemnation. She displayed a coded signal. I saw pressure marks. I intervened. Nothing more. Later, one of Camilla's aides received a quiet update. Her upcoming dinner appearance at the Naval Heritage Gala was being transferred to Princess Anne. No public explanation. Just a line in the internal calendar changed from QCC to HRH Anne, TBC. No press, no whisper campaign, no headlines. But anyone who knew the rhythms of Windsor's walls would understand the palace wasn't reacting out of rage, it was reacting out of order. And once that machine began, it didn't stop. By early evening, the shift was undeniable. Queen Camilla moved through Windsor's inner halls with the practiced gait of someone used to being seen. But something had changed. It wasn't the decor, it wasn't the weather, it was the silence. Staff no longer offered the same subtle curtsies when she passed. No one avoided her, but they didn't engage either. They stepped aside out of protocol, not deference. And when she entered the green parlour to review the next morning's event list, the only thing waiting on the table was a shortened itinerary, half the pages it normally was. She scanned it once, Then again. The nameplate for the Naval Heritage Gala had been removed entirely. Her lunch with the Youth Engagement Fund, marked as postponed. Even the private dinner with the Earl of Twickenham was now labelled as pending, awaiting royal clearance. Camilla frowned. "Where is Marianne?" she asked aloud, referring to her private secretary. No one answered. There was no one in the room. Across the corridor, she heard a steward whispering. Her name wasn't mentioned, but her title was. Her Majesty was advised not to continue the rest of today's agenda. The voice lowered as the door eased shut. Camilla walked into the main hallway, expecting to see the usual flow of aides coming and going, but it felt thinner, the air itself somehow cooler. She tried checking her phone. No new messages from the internal coordination group, no updates from the transport staff. The usual fleet sheet hadn't been sent. It wasn't chaos, it was precision. Her presence was simply no longer required. And the message wasn't verbal. It was absence. That was how the palace spoke, when it no longer needed confrontation, when it had already decided. Camilla stood still for a long moment at the edge of the corridor, her reflection caught faintly in the window glass beside her. Somewhere down the hall, a steward's voice called for a tray to be sent to the Princess of Wales's suite. Another aide quietly passed holding the evening logistics binder and didn't offer her a copy. Camilla said nothing. But for the first time that day, she felt it. Not anger, not rejection, irrelevance. And it echoed louder than any reprimand ever could. The sun had dipped below the West Tower now, casting the stone walls of Windsor in muted gold. Inside the paediatric suite, the air was warm and still. The buzz of the day had faded to soft murmurs, faint clinks of teacups, and the distant hum of security patrols rotating shift. Princess Charlotte sat on a plush armchair by the window, her shoes now traded for house slippers, her cardigan buttoned neatly. A half-drunk glass of orange juice rested beside her. Her braid had come slightly loose. Across from her, Catherine sat with one leg crossed, not as the future queen, but as a mother. She wasn't prying, she wasn't pressing, she simply waited. "Do you feel all right?" Catherine asked gently. Charlotte nodded. "Would you rather go home now?" A pause, then a small shake of the head. "No?" Another pause. Charlotte glanced at her hands, then looked up. "I still want to finish the poem tomorrow," she said quietly, "but not with her." "You won't have to," Catherine replied, brushing a loose strand from Charlotte's cheek. "That part is done." There was no mention of Camilla, no explanation offered, because none was needed. Charlotte looked toward the window again. "Will I be in trouble?" "No," Catherine said. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do." Charlotte's voice dropped even lower. "Even the signal?" Catherine smiled, soft and certain. "Especially the signal." The child nodded again, slower this time. The tension that had wrapped around her spine since the moment in the long library had finally begun to release. Just then, the door to the suite cracked open slightly. Sergeant Holden Merrick stood in the hallway, passing by with his replacement from the evening rotation. He didn't stop. But as he stepped into Charlotte's line of sight, she noticed. Their eyes met for a breath. He didn't speak, didn't wave, didn't even smile, but he dipped his chin. The smallest nod. Charlotte gave the same back. No words, just the softest acknowledgement between soldier and sovereign in waiting. Holden continued down the corridor, his stride measured, his gloves still on. Catherine watched the exchange from the side. She didn't interrupt. Because sometimes the most important recognitions didn't need to be said out loud. By the time dusk settled over the stone courtyards of Windsor, the corridors had thinned. Only the shuffle of logistics staff remained, clearing tea trays, folding linens, checking locks. Sergeant Holden Merrick stood alone beneath the arched entryway of the long library, his post complete, his duty not yet dismissed. Captain Wynne approached without ceremony, glancing down once at the private security log held in his hand. "You remained longer than scheduled," Wynne said. "Yes, sir. You broke protocol." "I enforced safeguarding," Holden replied, without hesitation. Wynne gave a quiet nod, the kind shared between men who had both seen combat and knew that not all battles were visible. "You're relieved," Wynne said simply. Holden inclined his head, stepped back, and unlatched the brass buckle at his waist. As he turned to walk away from the post, the corridor ahead opened, and from it came the soft footfalls of two familiar figures, Catherine and Charlotte. They weren't speaking, just walking hand in hand, side by side, no entourage, no aides, just quiet, deliberate movement. Charlotte wore a fresh dress now, dark green with a subtle pleated hem. Her braid had been retied, tighter and neater than before. She didn't look like a girl who had cried. She looked like a girl who had decided something. Holden paused, stepping aside with respectful formality. He didn't expect acknowledgement, not now. But Catherine, as they passed, glanced at him, only briefly, no words, no thanks. But her eyes held steady on his for a full second, and in that silence something passed between them. Not appreciation, not approval, trust. Charlotte didn't look back. She didn't need to. A child's voice may be quiet in a place like this, hidden behind stone walls, thick doors, and ancient tradition. But today, she had spoken in the only way she was allowed, and someone had heard her, someone had moved, and that movement had changed everything. Do you think the royal guard made the right call by demanding that salute? Should Camilla face formal consequences, or was the palace's quiet response enough? And what would you have done in Holden's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story made you feel something, tap the like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next Royal Guard moment. Then share this video with someone who still believes real respect can't be faked. Our other Royal Guard stories should be appearing on your screen right about now, so go give those a watch next. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with a brand new story.